Welcome everyone to another episode of Lockdown Dads. My name's Ian Dinwiddie. I'm the founder of Inspiring Dads, a business that helps stressed dads to balance work and fatherhood. I have two children and they're actually both having their birthdays this weekend. By the time this goes live, they will be 11 and 8.
Nice. And I'm James Miller, author of Dads Don't Babysit and editor of workingdads.co.uk, and a father of two other children who don't have their birthdays this weekend. Lucky them, because lockdown birthdays are rubbish. Good luck with that, Ian. Not one, but two lockdown birthdays. Anyway, I'm delighted to say our guest this week is Paul Bulos. So let me read it out because I've just written it down. He's an executive wellbeing and leadership coach and a publishing industry professional, and involved with diversity networks and stuff like that you worked on in publishing. We'll maybe talk about a bit later. But let's start off with the same question. We always start with, I don't know if this question is ever going to be boring ever again. I think it's going to stay interesting forever, but it is. How are you, Paul?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be on the podcast today. So it's great to be with you both. How am I? Now, look, I think that's a really big question. You say it's not going to get boring. I'm about to make it really even more interesting for you guys. So in broad strokes, I'm doing pretty well today. It's my favourite kind of weather today in London. It's bright, it's cold, it's crisp, it's dry. And after when you've had a wet week, which we've all had, that always kind of gives you a bit of energy, makes you feel better about everything, really. The reason I think it's a big question is, and you mentioned my diversity and inclusion, and I have a particular interest in well-being and mental health, but generically, it's potential to a gateway to revealing or concealing so much more the how are you question. So we could answer it physically, mentally, about this week, next week, the longer term, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to turn this question around, because in my coaching practice recently, I tried a check-in which was slightly different, and I'm going to answer the check-in question that I'm going to ask and ask you back. How about that? Make it a bit different for you.
Oh, hang on. We'll be going for what, 30 episodes? You're going to change the how are you question. This is massive.
Consider it early. I know you're both interested in coaching, so consider it an early coaching challenge. How about that?
Yeah,
so
good.
The check-in that I did recently was, if you could describe how you are doing as a colour, what would that colour be and why? Right.
Well, let's finish you first. What colour are you?
So I'm going to be yellow. It's been a not a bad week. It's certainly got better because, of course, we're in what my kids call Fun Day Friday. By the way, I've got two kids. More about them later, probably. And so Fun Day Friday is what they called it since they were really tiny. It stayed with us. So I'm going with that feeling. I'm going with the feeling of the weather. And in terms of energy, connecting with people always gives me energy. So seeing you guys, appearing on a podcast, gives me loads of energy. So I'm yellow. Over to you.
I've got mine. I'll go first. Yeah. Okay, so I'm green, I think, Paul. And I think green for go, because despite James's disappointment at the concept of lockdown birthdays, both my kids are really excited about having a day to themselves. So they've chosen food for each day. Each meal is planned. Dodgy frankfurters, which is my son's favourite food when he goes to Crystal Palace. When we get to go to Selhurst Park and watch Palace play, always has a hot dog, always has a frankfurter. So he's been choosing that. Also green for Pakistan, and the reason that is that this week I managed to book a couple of tickets to the one-day international England versus Pakistan in July, fingers crossed, at Lord's, with my mate Dave Varley, who I know listens, so big shout out to Dave. And the two of us, we usually have been going every year, apart from last year. We go to Lord's to watch cricket. We watch England play, and it's our little man date out. So green for Pakistan, green for go, green for the weekend.
I don't know, this is quite a hard question.
That's what happens when you talk to coaches, James.
Yeah, I don't know. You see, I don't know any coaching. I don't know what colour. I mean, I'm inclined to say black.
Okay.
Just because, I don't know. No, I didn't think I was doing that bad this week, but, it still feels, I don't know. I quite like black. Surely it depends what colour you like as well. I mean, I quite like black. I mean, This is, maybe that's the thing, is that it's, it depends what colour you like. I like, I wrote into Steve Wright's Non-Stop Oldies the other week with a list of sad songs and happy songs go. After 20 years together, my partner and I still haven't resolved what's better, sad songs or happy songs. I like sad songs, she likes happy songs. I just embrace the blackness. I don't know. I don't know if I've got. I'm wearing a blue shirt. Does that count?
Your beard's looking very grey today.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd say black, but not necessarily in a bad way. Is that allowed?
Of course. I mean, why would we necessarily? We all appropriate things to the colours, don't we? Black. I like wearing black, and I think it's a great colour. It doesn't have to be anything other than whatever it means to you, does it, James? And that can be good, or if you're feeling, that it's a down colour, then that's that. Different things for different days, right?
Everything's black at the moment, anyway, isn't it? I mean, let's face it, everything is actually bleak. I mean, I think I was slightly ahead of the curve. A lot of people this week seem to have hit the lockdown wall. It feels like a lot of people are going, oh, it's just, hopeless at the moment. And I've read pieces about why that is. It's actually, your brain has nothing to look forward to. So it's, people feel hopeless. But, I was there a couple of weeks ago. I feel a bit cheerier now. I think maybe that's what it is. I've sort of embraced the lockdown and got used to it. That's embracing the bleakness of lockdown and, made my peace with it for now. Yeah. I could change hour by hour, let's face it. Right, we'll have to remember this. We'll have to have an editorial meeting about whether we're going to change the "How are you?" question to "What color are you?" on a weekly basis.
Good. What it means. I think the most important thing is what it means to you, as Paul said. It's not necessarily about the color itself. It's what association you have with it. Good question. I like it.
Well, that could be fun. Yeah. I mean, when you said green, as in Frankfurters, I was a bit like, yeah, those Selhurst Frankfurters are a bit dodgy. I could see how they could return in a green form at one end or the other. Don't sue Selhurst. I've been going to Selhurst Park for 40 years. You can't sue me for claiming that the Frankfurters aren't that
good. Now you guys are going into territories that make me a bit uncomfortable. As a QPR supporter and my brother being a Palace supporter, we're now entering into a potentially, very choppy waters here.
It's called Eze, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
that's basically what it is.
Thanks. I wasn't going to mention him.
No, it's okay. We've talked. We had Elliot Ray from Music Football Fatherhood was on and talked about Eze's transfer, didn't we? But anyway, let's move on away from Eze's transfer. So Paul, you sort of said about how at the moment things were pretty good. How's your experience been in the last sort of 3 to 6 months, and what sort of ups and downs have you experienced?
Yeah, good question, Ian. Good question. I mean, the first thing to tell everybody is that I've got 2 children, neither of whom have their birthdays this weekend, but I've got a son who is 12 and a daughter who is 14, 15 in the summer. So, and a wife who's at the moment at the dentist having root canal. So my afternoon's only going to get better.
Black.
Sorry, back to black. We've had some interesting times actually, and I think for me, speaking as a dad, I've learned an incredible amount, both from a purely self-awareness point of view, but also a lot about the family dynamic and how I am in the family and how my children perceive me as a working dad in and around the house. So the summertime lockdown, or the spring into summertime, the big lockdown, the first one, was a really interesting time, and I think we all went into it not knowing A, how long it was going to last, B, what the heck we were all supposed to be doing here, and C, never having spent that amount of time around each other, but I suppose with the benefit of knowing that we could all get out. And then we had the shorter autumn one, which we thought, well, okay, so we've learned loads of stuff from the first one, this will be a breeze, but actually we found that quite tough. And then we've got this what looks to be a slightly sort of interim longer one, who knows, and this is really tough. So I think the weather and the dark is having a big impact on us in this one, because of course the early summer one we went out a lot, and actually it's that going out a lot thing, where we were walking, maybe making a real effort on our walks. We've got a dog, so that's always helpful, but we were making a real effort, whereas now we're much more restricted in A, where we can walk, and B, sort of what times of the day and weather reliant, whereas in the summertime it's much easier. So 2 kids, 12 and 14. Yeah, we're close. I've always been really close to my kids, but I've got a lot closer, and some of that's good and some of that's not been so good. I think that we, in this lockdown, I just note what you just said about this sort of embracing the lockdown, James. I think this week we've almost reached peak cabin fever. I think. I've very much noticed it with the kids. They are brewing for one almighty fight. I think they're going for each other, keeping going. And of course, at the same time, my wife and I are trying really hard not to be drawn in, but with the best intentions, that's quite difficult. First lockdown, it was experimental, and actually, I think I wrote a blog about it. Because one of the key things that really came through that first lockdown was my relationship with my daughter, and being that she started 13, went into being 14. That's quite an age for young females. Lots going on, lots changing, I noticed a lot changing. And just before the lockdown, I was, being very honest about it, finding it quite difficult. Our connections seemed to be drifting a little bit, where we'd been really close before. We'd done a lot of things together. She sort of flipped into that proper teenage time, and she was beginning to just drift away a bit. And I was finding that quite a struggle. So that was just before lockdown. I started to really notice it. In fact, I remember very vividly, just before all of this began last year, having a conversation with my wife about it and saying, I'm really quite worried about my relationship with her. And I'm feeling sad about that. And then the lockdown happened. And of course, that conversation didn't really reappear because everything in our world changed so rapidly. But what did happen over that lockdown period is me and my daughter went on, she's an early bird like me. I fondly called her my morning bird, actually, after a song by one of my favourite artists, Sade. And we get up early, and we have always done things early: swimming, going out, in the garden, whatever, always. And then we started doing this walk. We live in West London, so we started walking to Osterley Park very early. And it was really, we didn't often say that much to each other, but the content of what we started to talk about between us was far more meaningful than it had ever been. I think we just started to reconnect, but in a different way. And our relationship changed over those first few months of lockdown, to the point when we got to the end of what we thought was going to be the end of that lockdown, when they sort of said, oh, well, you're going to go back to hybrid working and have to go back into the office a bit and all that, around about the July-ish time, I guess it was. And up until that point, we'd had these amazing conversations, and she'd been sharing a few things with me. That she's an introvert, so she doesn't tend to share feelings hugely easily. They're there, but she conceals them quite a lot. But she'd been sharing a lot more about stuff. And then I said to her on one of those walks, I said, how do you feel about me going back into the office again, back into central London? And she said, I'm not really sure about you going back, Dad. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, I feel safe. And it was a really moving moment for me. And I said to her, what do you mean safe? And she said, well, when you're here, everything feels like it's going to be okay. And that we're all going to be okay. And that we're all together. And when I think about you going back into London, albeit, the working week, I just don't feel quite safe. And I posed back a challenge to her. I said, well, even if you're back at school and I'm back at work and all of that. And she said, even if I go back to school, then I still know you're there. And so it was a real moment. So that was, I think, one of the biggest moments of lockdown for me.
A couple of really interesting things there. I think one is going for walks. Some of the stuff we did with our Working Dad survey last year, and some of the responses, that exactly that, dads going for walks with their teenagers, because obviously usually teenagers have got a hell of a lot better things to do than go for a walk with their dad. But that's all they could do. So you had them trapped. And yeah, actually, one of the big advantages was that you could have those talks, just even as you say, not even necessarily talking much, but just being around each other, walking together, had an impact. And also that feeling of, feeling safe while you're around is a really powerful case for flexible working, right? For dads not to be not just in the office, but then commuting and then basically, out of the house for the vast majority of the day. And one of the interesting things about flexible working that, some of the stuff I've done is that you find dads often, or how do you put it, a higher proportion of dads think that the switch to secondary school is a time when they need to be around for their kids. With mums, it tends to be early days much more. For again, as ever, practical reasons. That's why we don't want to get into maternity and paternity leave. I think we're probably all on the same page that men need more paternity leave, etc. But that speaks to that issue that that kids need their dads as well as their mums around at that age a bit more. And obviously, flexible working is the way to do that. Interesting one to take forward that in terms of the campaign to entrench flexible working going forward.
Yeah. I mean, my call to arms in my blog was just around exactly that issue, and also how in sort of traditional office sort of terms, we, the vocabulary that we use around dads and being around for their family. So, how comfortable are dads saying, I can't make that meeting at 5:30 because if I do that, I can't get the train, which means I won't be home for my kids. And I think that time of it being okay to ask that because your children need a bedtime story is one reserve, but as they grow older and actually into teenagers, I think they actually need you back around a bit more. There's a lot going on hormonally, a lot going on emotionally, and the notion of safety, be it reading a bedtime story to a slightly younger child or just coming home and being present when your teenagers are upstairs. I'll never forget a colleague of mine many years ago when I was working at the BBC, said he had slightly older children in mind, and his children were then the ages my children were now, and particularly with the 14-year-old, he said, you come home one day and they don't come to the door. And I said, no, I can't imagine that. Can't imagine it. He said, I know you can't, but it will happen and it will feel weird. But he said to me, it's no less important that I'm coming through that door at the same sort of time, even if they don't come down like they used to run to the door. And that's actually stayed with me. And I now notice that more. They never come to the door. The only time they ever come to the door is if my wife's, doing something and she can't open it, or I forgot my keys or whatever it is. But I think there's a lot there around the flexible work, and there's a lot there around how we talk about men and the office and getting away from the office, and how comfortable they are saying, actually, I want to go home because I want to be with my kids. And then that should stretch right across their ages, I think.
And that, of course, was the age at which you get a dog, when they no longer come to the door, because the dog always comes to the door. Oh, he's come back. Interesting. Yeah. You talk about catching the same train, getting the right train. You got any thoughts on catching the right train, Ian? You got any?
I've always got a thought on catching the right train. Something I wrote up, probably not for the first time, as these things these themes tend to come around. It was something that I reflected on recently in terms of my experience of being a new dad, and I was working 4 days a week. I had a 5th day which I was at home, and it was flexing. It was when Freya was just after she was born, and for the first sort of 6 months of her life. And I hadn't realized how important catching the right train home had been. And my wife knew exactly what time I'd be walking through the door at the end of the working day, because she knew which train I was planning to get. And the impact of being slightly later really made a big difference to her. If I just casually, and for a while I didn't know this, and so I'd casually text her and just say, oh, I'm really sorry, I've got to get something out the door, I can't get that train, I'll be on the next one, I'll be on the 6:30 or whatever it might have been. And that really affected her. And as soon as I knew that, I was able to be a lot more focused about how I kind of controlled my time and how important it was to leave and catch that train. It's something that I was blissfully unaware of. And yeah, I wrote something up on my own blog today, this week, James. Thank you for asking. But yeah, I think sometimes we can forget those little things. I think, as you're saying, Paul, being there even if your kids don't necessarily appear to appreciate it. It's the fact that you're there and you're present and you're making an effort, and you're following through sometimes with those rituals, I think, that are so important. But yeah, importance of getting the right train, and importance of understanding where those pressure points are. I think certainly when you're it comes at any time, but certainly when kids are young, I think understanding where your pressure points and your partner's pressure points are in the day, when the children are going to need the most support, bath time, bedtime, dinner time at the end, those kind of things, and making our effort, making as much effort as possible to be there for those moments. I think it does matter.
Well, just pick it up on the concept of train. I mean, who knows when we're ever going to get trains again in the normal way? But interestingly, one of the things that I reflected on around that is that transition, and I found the transition between work and coming home, and almost re-entry into domestic and household and parenting life. That for many years was always a really quite a big challenge, maybe a bit strong, but let's go with challenge, maybe a big challenge for me, because I always found that re-entry point quite difficult, quite, I felt like I'd been on the outside of this domestic parenting world for 7 hours a day, maybe longer if the train had been delayed or whatever it is. And then coming back in, there was always a bit of a bit of tension in that as I sort of eased myself back in from everybody, actually, because dad's back from work, and the old stay and wait till your dad's back from work, and that kind of, what's the expectation of me when I get back from work? Have I got to turn into dad straight away? Am I allowed to talk about work? We do talk about your day, that being the kids, always found that quite hard, and sometimes just I remember particularly when they were much younger, the kids, finding that, getting to the end of the week, feeling really dissatisfied with that, feeling like why do I feel like I'm re-entering somewhere that's my home that doesn't always feel that way because I've come from this other world. And actually in the lockdown period, one of the other things that was sort of found quite interesting is that the children for the first time in their lives really have seen me work, seen what that means, what that looks like. And so if I ever came home from work and I was particularly preoccupied or had a difficult day, they never really kind of grasped the concept of that. But now that we're around each other so much more, we have conversations in the day much more readily around what's going on. So it's not like you go away at, 7:30 and you're back at 6 and then you sort of have to condense all that stuff in the middle. We're reconnecting over the day 3, 4, 5 times and having different kinds of conversations. So they're understanding what it looks like to work and what goes on in that work world for me, and vice versa for their school day. I'd never, some of the things that they're doing and getting up to, and how some of their stresses and strains, when they've had a frustrating lesson, or when they feel like they haven't really been heard in their lesson. I wouldn't normally hear that stuff, but now I'm hearing it much more regularly. So it's we're relating in a very different way, and understanding and appreciating and having more empathy for each other in a very different way.
Yeah, you're speaking to point 1 and 2 on the Building Back Better agenda that I drew up for working dads, which has been it was supposed to start at the start of the year, but obviously everything went out the window. So, it's been shelved for briefly. Hopefully we're back very soon once people's brains have got a bit more capacity to think about things and listen. But absolutely. Number 2 is empathy within the household, as well as sort of empathy within the workplace. And number 1 is what I've called the switch. It comes up time and again. I mean, on this podcast and in various panels I've done through lockdown, most of them with Ian. It's this thing of that switch from work to home, and that really speaks to something. I think it speaks to something being wrong, that men, dads, need a space to switch between the two, or maybe the problem is that women don't get the space to switch between the two, so that's why they're so much better at it. It's that's why I made it number 1 on that agenda, because it came up so often, and I just think there's something going on there, and I don't think it's a good thing, but I don't know exactly what the approach is. But very much the approach with the Building Back Better thing is to discuss and try and come up with answers.
It's the thing that I think my wife and the kids have really enjoyed, is the fact that although my wife still works very long hours, as she always did, she's around for every lunchtime. We sit together and have lunch. We dip in and out, and so those difficult lessons, as my son had a difficult moment with maths when he got to the end and he was just being a bit clueless about the answer. It's like, you can do this, and he was like, no, it's this answer. I said, okay, it's not, but then my wife was able to pop out and we were able to sort of talk about it, and there was just so much more interaction. So I think it's something that we'll face more and more in the next year, couple of years, probably, hopefully forever, is men who generally don't get that is becoming, almost by necessity, becoming much more comfortable with the integration of work and home life, and you can't necessarily compartmentalize in a way that perhaps men generally have been very used to.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
I'm interested. I mean, we're talking. Obviously, you've thought about this stuff, Paul, and I wonder. I mean, which way around did the coaching come? Did you think about this stuff and your life, and perhaps more broadly, and that brought you to being a coach, or is it vice versa? Did you start coaching and that sort of triggered some more substantial thoughts about how everything fits together in terms of work and life?
Yeah, good question. I think that. Probably a combination, really, I imagine. I mean, I've always been very reflective and thoughtful about being a parent and how I parent and who I am as a parent and a dad, and sort of kind of ironically, we've had fairly traditional roles in our family over the years about that and the choices that we made in terms of how we parented. And it's not so much that those roles didn't feel comfortable for me; it was just how present and where I was in that. So coaching came a bit later. Came a bit later in my life in terms of a realization of the power of and the transformational power of having had coaching myself, having had an opportunity to sit with examining some of my values and some of the things that are important. And a few of the things that came out as very high value, important values to me were around my responsibilities as a parent and the importance I put there. So they sort of kind of, overlapped in that way. And I think ultimately, though, what it was the transformational power of knowing that I had, a lot going on that I hadn't previously necessarily been aware of, that coaching enabled me to realize, which is the power of coaching. It's a really great self-awareness tool, in essence, and allows you then to think, how can I progress forward in the things that I want to do? And so, it, again, though, interested me in terms of being a parent, and things like listening. I've become much better at that, because as a coach, that's something that's incredibly important in that space. And so with my children, listening has become something far more, especially as they become far more cognitive in the world and they've got their own things. You really have to listen to them. They've got something to say now, whereas when they're little, they're just looking at you almost to repeat what they need to say. But as they've grown up into this sort of, I think probably post 10, 11, they've really got something to say, and it's worth listening to. And my son constantly, he's the extrovert, my daughter's the introvert in terms of their personality types, more extrovert than he's introvert, and vice versa. He always says, but you're not letting me speak. And it's ironic because he speaks a lot, but it's not that he's not being, it's not that he's lacking the speaking, it's understanding that he's being listened to, and that requires reflection back to him, all those kind of things. So the coaching has really helped in those relationships. With my daughter, who's a lot quieter, actually she's helped me as a coach, because one of the things, and Ian, I'm sure you'll relate to this, one of the important things of being a coach is being able to be in the quiet and be comfortable in that quiet space, and allowing that space, not feeling you need to fill it, not feeling you need to rescue, but providing your coachee with that. Now, when I have conversations with my daughter, because she, at the moment she's being fairly aggressive, but normally she's quite quiet and thoughtful, and her feelings are quite deep. They don't come to the surface. She doesn't wear a heart on her sleeve. So she's actually helped me in my coaching practice, because I have to sit with that space a lot more than I do with my son, for example. You ask him a question and he's off. You ask her a question and there's a lot more space. And actually, I find one of the really powerful times in coaching is when you don't feel a necessity to fill that space and you just let it be. And then you give your coachee, or in my case, my daughter, the time to express themselves. So yeah, that's a good question. Bit of a mix of both, I would say.
I mean, unfortunately, we've only got 5 minutes left on the clock, so we can't sit around and wait to see who, leave space for anybody to speak. We've got to fill it up. I'd love to sit and, see who speaks first and what they've got to say, but that's not going to fly. Let's tie things up with some of your thoughts. Let's have a thought. Well, I was going to go to Paul, but Ian looks like he's ready to pounce with a tip. He looks like a coiled spring all of a sudden. This had better be a good one. I've given it a good big build up.
All right, I've even brought my tip. So this works better on obviously on the YouTube version of this rather than the podcast. Last year in the long lockdown, haircuts were a real issue. I had a slightly ropey haircut. I've styled mine au naturel. It's starting to come out the sides, nothing on top, comes out the sides, all over the place. And my wife cut with scissors, because you couldn't buy a razor, a shaver sort of anywhere to do your hair, but they're back in stock. So if you feel like you missed out and you've forgotten, then back in stock. This is the one we've picked up. I think this is part of my kid's birthday treat, is to cut Daddy's hair. This one comes with different colors. I mean, it's beautiful. I mean, there's a light blue, there's a purple, there's all the different gradings. I quite fancy having a grade 3 all over, because at some stage I figured if I'm going to go even shorter on top and start losing, I'm going to have it. Apparently my nose is too pointy and I'll look ridiculous if I have it all off. I'd quite like them to try that. So yeah, that my top tip is, if you thought haircuts were over and you couldn't get hold of a shaver, with a grader and all the rest of it. This was £30 from Argos.
That is a very, very good tip, because I'm thinking about going there. But also it means people are more likely to come back next week to watch to see what's happened to your hair.
What's happened to it? Yeah, exactly.
For one, we'll be back
This
next
is the
week just to
before.
see the hair. I'm not really interested in the chat. It's the hair I want to know about. Okay, let's go to Paul next, and then I'll tailor my tip depending on how much time we've got left. Paul, what would be your tip for lockdown dads?
Okay, I've got two. I'm going to pick one of them. Try to understand the language of gaming.
I wondered what you were going to say there. Gaming.
So one of the things I found in my walks, apart from some of the banal conversations I have with myself about what the heck's going on in our world, is the conversations I have with my son about his gaming, which is his social world right now. And that's tough because he's a big football player. He just can't train and do all that. So I remember when he used to collect Pokemon cards, I would walk with him and he would talk to me and I literally didn't understand a single word he said. And it's now happening with Fortnite. So I have now invested in the time to say to him, could you just explain what you're talking about? Because I realize this could go on a while. I can't have conversations with him that I really don't understand for any longer. So I thought, invest in understanding the language of gaming. That's my top tip for dads.
That is also an excellent tip, because Minecraft has landed in our house in quite a big way recently. I don't know what a golem is or a control block or something, but I ought to find out, because yes, it comes up a lot in conversation. Right. Well, in that case, I'll dump my stupid tip and try and go with a useful one, because that's been two really good ones so far. And you can tell it's a good tip because it's not mine. I stole it from somebody else. It's Rachel Vecht's Circle of Control, and you have to call it Rachel Vecht Circle of Control because it sounds so much better. It sounds like a punk band from the 70s. Look it up on LinkedIn. Go find Rachel, former guest on this podcast. But basically, when you are in the depths of this lockdown and all the rest of it, draw a circle, write in it what you can control and what you can't on the outside. And it just helps to keep a lid on what's going on and understand that you can't control everything, particularly at the moment. There's an awful lot of things we can't control. So adopt Rachel Vecht's Circle of Control.
Fantastic.
That's a great one.
That is good. Paul, how can people connect with you if they want to connect and find out more about what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they can connect with me through LinkedIn. I've got quite a presence there. So I'm visible there. My surname is Bulos, which is unusual. So it's Bulos. And my email address is on there. And I'm very happy for anybody who wants coaching or to talk about anything else. I'm very active in the sort of men and mental health area too. Particularly, I do sort of that wellbeing piece, but I am an executive and leadership coach. So that's probably the best way. Do you want me to shout out my actual email address? Or
no, we'll put it all in the comments. That'll be fine. We'll put it in the description. Fantastic. Paul, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been episode number 30 of Lockdown Dads. We'll be back next week with a new guest. But in the meantime, do like, subscribe and share. And we look forward to seeing and hearing more from you and everyone else next week. Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. And thank you, James. Great. Cheers.
I'm back for the hair next week.